Happy noon, insiders. Well, noon in New York. Welcome to Thursday. Very excited to have the United Nations back with us this week for an architecture tour of the UN. We have Jonathan Michal with us, who is tour guide at the UN. We're super excited about this. Couple things, just so you know. One of which is, like last week, if you joined us with Emily, we are going to do a little bit of a break in the middle for Q&A and then Q&A at the end. So please keep the questions coming in the chat. I will be monitoring them. Also, at the end of the presentation, again, if you were with us last week, we did a group screenshot photo. We'll be doing that again. Our guide from last week, Emily, is joining us, and she will be the one doing the screenshot at the end. So please stick around if you'd like to turn your cameras on and give us a big smile. So hi, Jeffrey, Robin in the Berkshires, Lorraine in Asheville, Klaus from the Flatiron District. Happy, as usual, to have you guys here. If anybody new is joining us, welcome. My name is Justin Rivers. I'm Chief Experience Officer for Untapped New York, and always a pleasure to have you. With that being said, again, this is part of the UN 75 celebration and initiative for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. The UN asks if you have a minute and a half, basically. There's a survey that they would like you to take. I've put the link to the survey in the chat. I will put the link again at the end of the presentation in the chat, and I will email the group afterwards with the link and other important information as well. If you took the survey, you don't need to take it again. All right, so with that being said, Jonathan, I turn it over to you. Everybody enjoy the presentation.
Thank you very much, Justin. Hi, I'm Jonathan. I am a UN tour guide. My special passion is the architecture of the building. And that's what we're gonna talk about today. I have to say that I'm very excited, and maybe you're going to notice in the beginning I'm very passionate about this subject, but I'll calm down in a few seconds and we'll be fine. And we're going to talk about the headquarters of the United Nations, which are considered to be one of the most unique international style buildings in the world. And that is because of many reasons. But before we start going into the tour, as some of you may know, the UN headquarters is sitting on a territory that's called Special Status Diplomatic Territory, which means that in reality, the United Nations area is functioning like ex-territory. It doesn't really belong to, it's not completely under the jurisdiction of the United States. It's considered to be an area that can operate on its own terms. It has its own fire unit. It has its own police force. But this is just showing that this place could not have been built if it had to be built under the requirements of New York regulations or even United States regulations. So that's our starting point. And I want to go back to the year 1945. Now, in 1945, maybe when I look at photos from 1945, it's obvious this was a completely different time. But at the end of the Second World War, this is when the United Nations was created. Signed by 51 member states. They signed the United Nations Charter, and they were looking for a home. The home was offered to them by the United States, and specifically by Rockefeller Jr., who donated the land, which is now where the United Nations is settled. But at the same time, huge projects were happening nationwide, also in New York. I'm going to show you just a few examples of what could have been in the area where the United Nations structure is built today. So in this photo here, we see the signing of the UN Charter. This is 1945. This is a time where international style is already, it exists in the world, it was already present for about maybe 10 years or even more. But in 1945, after the Second World War, new ideas about how the future should look like came up. And international style sounded like a great idea to many people all around the world. And we're going to talk about why international style was chosen for this building as well. So we have to begin with an important person, Wallace Harrison. You can see him here in the photo below. He is the person holding the bucket and putting cement in the cornerstone of the United Nations building, which is actually located, if you can take a look at this image here, and I don't know if you see my mouse cursor or not, but on the bottom right side of the Secretariat building, which is a tall tower, of course, of the United Nations, that is where the cornerstone is, where the building was founded. And inside the cornerstone, they actually symbolically put a copy of the United Nations Charter and a book with all the schedules of meetings leading towards the decision to have the United Nations in New York. Other options for the headquarters were to put the United Nations on a boat, so it will be on international waters. Other countries offered their grounds. Many areas in New York State and even in New York City were offered for the United Nations, but eventually this was the area that was chosen. Now, I'm very happy about this image here in this presentation, because what it shows us is an area which is pretty much the 18 acres of the United Nations today, but with a totally different plan. And this is where it all started. There was a developer in New York, his name is Zuckendorf, and maybe you can remember some of his buildings that he actually built in Irving Place, and he was a great developer also at the times. He had this vision of building a huge complex of office towers, a shopping mall. There are descriptions of this building here that even have, there's a helicopter pad, a helipad over here on the bottom, so you can access it with your own helicopter and just go into this huge complex, but he never had the funds to build it. And this is actually exactly in the area where the UN is built today, without the south part, which was never built by anyone. So Zuckendorf is unable to build his ex-city, and actually the plan that he's thinking about is he's doing it with Wallace Harrison, which was the architect. He built Rockefeller Center. He was, I can even say, Rockefeller's favorite architect. He did many projects for him in the time and in the future after this time. And Rockefeller says, okay, let's just buy this land, give it to the United Nations, which is an organization that he was very supportive of. And let's build the headquarters there. So I'm going to show you a few examples of other ideas for the United Nations headquarters. Let's go through a few of them. This one here, it's a little bit hard to see because the images are not, they're very old, they're not really produced in high resolution. But what you see here is on the left side is Manhattan Island. In the middle, you could see Roosevelt Island. And on the right side, it's actually Long Island City. So the idea was to have a connection between the United Nations headquarters through a bridge to Long Island City. This was an idea by Sven Markelius, which we're going to talk about too. He's an architect that was on the board to design the headquarters of the UN. This is a drawing by Hugh Harris, and he drew an image of how he felt the United Nations headquarters would look like, with people going up as if they're rising, ascending to this building, which is a marvel of freedom, of democracy, of multiculturalism, all these ideas that the UN held, and he was also a great fan. He did most of the drawings of the images for the committee that had to choose which design is gonna be. the actual United Nations. Here's another idea. This is attributed to Le Corbusier. He enjoyed that, he really liked the idea of that helipad that I showed you before. And this idea of the UN headquarters with the secretary, with the General Assembly building in the center. It has a short runway for helicopters, or maybe at a time it was planned for small planes, so they can access the United Nations straight from the river. And another idea by Le Corbusier of the General Assembly building open on the bottom side, almost like a space station. This is very futuristic. This is another idea by Sven Markelius. He enjoyed the kind of round shapes of international styles, so he would like to have the entire area, the entire building shaped by these curved lines. And here's another picture image of people going up into the building. This is an idea by Nikolai Basov. He was an architect from the Soviet Union, and you can probably recognize the Soviet design to his idea of the UN headquarters. But I want to move on from these very fascinating ideas. Actually, if you go into the archives of the United Nations, you can find 46 different options for the building. So the building now was probably the idea of Oskar Niemeyer, who was one of the 10 architects that were on the board, the international board, what Wallace Harrison called the Workshop for Peace. Architects from all over the world chosen by the member states of the very young United Nations to build a center that will be home for all people of all nations from all over the world. And following international style, these architects wanted to implement the values of the United Nations in the building itself. So the first one is transparency. And if you had a chance to be inside the United Nations building, but even outside of it, you will see that the entire structure is completely exposed. You can look into the building through the huge glass windows, and we're going to see some examples of that from the inside. Also, you could look outside from inside the building, and even from the river, from the other side, you can see the building just standing there, leaning over the river, which is also a connection to nature, which was very important to some of the architects. They wanted it to be part of the surroundings, not just a concrete slab, which does not connect to the area that it's built in. So transparency is a major, it's a big part of the building and what you could see inside of it and outside of it. Accountability. We're going to see another example of that too, but the idea is that anybody working in the building has to be reminded that they are accountable to the public. And it's all based on simple shapes because the United Nations does not belong to any specific culture, tradition, or religion. So simple shapes appear in all cultures and all traditions and all religions. And no matter who you are, where you're from, you can always recognize the shapes, the elements that make this building. Inside the building itself, it's culturally neutral, so no ornaments, no decorations from a particular culture. It's a platform for dialogue, so you're going to see that it's very pleasant to be in and to walk in. And a universal cultural heritage refers to the fact that many member states contributed gifts to the United Nations, but they all follow the idea that these gifts are part of a human heritage. They're not national heritage. Another element which you can see from the outside of the United Nations is the golden ratio, which appears all over the building. And the golden ratio basically says that if you look at something and it's very pleasant to look at, it's probably because it has some mathematical logic behind it. And this is something that has been known from ancient times. So you can find in ancient Greece and in the Notre Dame and the painting of Mona Lisa. There are a few examples here. And also in the United Nations building, the golden ratio was used to be more pleasant for the eyes. So we're going into the building now, and we're in the entrance. There's a lot to say about the entrance. I hope that it won't get carried away, but we could start with some elements that you could see here. First of all, the United Nations, the headquarters in New York, are one of the few buildings left in New York City that are still cooling the building through the river, through the water, just on the side of the building in the river. Now, in the past, many buildings would cool themselves by putting their heating units inside the river, but that has been banned from use in the past several years because it just doesn't allow the river to cool down. And there was fear coming from people who were concerned for the safety of the life underwater. So that's not allowed to be done anymore in New York. But because the UN is in ex-territory, it still does that. I have to say that there was a big renovation called the CMP, Capital Master Plan, during the early 2010s until 2014. And the United Nations was kind enough to ask permission from the city of New York to continue practicing that way of cooling down a building, because if they would not be able to do so, then they would have to build heating units on the roof of the building, which of course would just completely make the entire shape of the building would change. So these tubes in the entrance of the building that you see on the right side are decorative, but also they are the cooling system of the building. And Niemeyer, Oscar Niemeyer, who was in charge of this unit, he wanted to have the simple elements that are functional for the building inside the building itself, following the form follows function, which is the base for international style design. On the left side, you can see the balconies looking into the different halls, the General Assembly Hall specifically, with the pathway coming up from the entrance to the second level. And this is where delegates can walk in just the same, from the same entrance that all public come into the building from. And this is, of course, to show equality between anybody who comes into the structure, into the building. The poles, you can see that they have lighting inside of them. And that is also an element of international style, to have the light not completely coming at you directly, but facing into these columns here, and then the light comes out very gently into the room. The floor is made of terrazzo, so this is something that is very unique. You can't find this, it's not common today for sure. And in general, if you look at images of this entrance from the 1950s until today, it hasn't changed much. All the materials in the building and outside are, most of them are local. The steel from the United States, the marble on the exterior is Vermont marble, and all the materials inside were, they prefer to buy local materials from the United States. These are the cooling pipes that I talked about before. And also you can see the windows, which are scaled. So the higher you look, the bigger the window is. So from any point of view, the windows will all look in the same size. It's an optical illusion. And the ceiling of the entrance is left unfinished. This is an element that you can find also throughout the building, because the idea is that the work of the United Nations can never be finished. So there's always something more to do, and you can't even finish the ceiling because it's never complete. The work of the UN, there's always something more that you can add. Speaking of optical illusions, after you enter the building, this is the corridor leading into the structure. And actually, it's the further point on the end of the image here in the center is higher than it actually seems. So this is an optical illusion to make the corridor seem longer and just more pleasant to look at. Also, you can notice that there are almost no straight lines in the building. You can always find a curve, and that's because the idea behind it is for people not to be blocked in their sight and for the eyes to be able to travel along the lines pleasantly and not just bumping into walls or into corners. Here's another view of the entrance. This is from the staircase leading to the second floor. And a few quotes about the building that I like very much. Ban Ki-moon, after the renovation in 2014 was complete, he said, "Our architects were ahead of the time. I hope that we will follow their example and stay at the vanguard when it comes to solving global problems." So he was a little bit critical about the work of the UN at the time, or maybe he was just kidding about it, but he was saying that the architects did such a great job that they didn't even have to change anything in the basic structure since 1952, when the building was complete, which I didn't mention that number, but the building was complete eventually in 1952. President Truman said that these are the most important buildings in the world, for they are the center of man's hope for peace and a better life. This is when he walked into the building and the first session that was held in the new headquarters. And Oscar Niemeyer, which built the General Assembly building, which designed it, he said something very interesting. He was asked about the building and he said, "It doesn't matter. The most important thing in life is not architecture. It's trying to change the world." And that's from someone who is known for his architecture. Oscar Niemeyer himself lived to the age of 104. He built many interesting projects all over the world. And we're going up to the third floor of the conference building, which is behind the General Assembly building. But basically, these all are connected. The General Assembly building, the conference building, the Secretariat, which was a tall tower you can see behind me in the image, and the library, which is the fourth building on the side, on the south side of the compound. So again, you can see here the elements, which are very simple. There's carpet, so you'll feel relaxed and comfortable when you walk. The lighting itself is dim, so everybody will feel comfortable in this building. And the elements themselves are simple, simple shapes. You can also see the large windows here on the side, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Outside of the windows, you can see the entrance to the UN compound. But what's more interesting is that if you walk from the outside into the building, you can already look inside. So this is, again, a part of the transparency value that was implemented into the architecture itself. Now, another point to make while we're looking at this facade of the Secretariat building, this is the first of its kind curtain wall building built in New York City. And after that, it became almost a standard where glass could be used to cover the facade of buildings. This was something that was uncommon in the early 1950s. So the UN in the beginning, when it just was built, was a wonderful example of that. This specific image shows one of the gifts that was given to the UN. This is called a stupa, and it's a gift from Thailand to the United Nations. It's a Buddhist shrine, and it's an example of, it goes to show peace and actually the government of Thailand said the same way that Buddhism has been spreading peace in the world, so does the UN today. So this is one example of the gifts that were given to the UN that showed us human heritage. All humans share the same values that follow the United Nations Charter. Those are the gifts that usually you would find inside the building, inside the headquarters. And I mentioned accountability. Accountability is implemented in the building in the form that what we're looking at here on the left side, This is where we were standing before, the third level of the visitor center in the conference building. We're actually entering the General Assembly building right now. And on the second level below us is the Chinese Delegate Lounge. Chinese lounge, it was donated by China, but this is where delegates could sit and have their meetings all over the building on the second floor. But they have to be reminded that we, the public, are looking over at the work of the delegates. So physically, having a reminder of people looking down at what you do reminds you that you are accountable to the public. Looking outside, this is just interesting if you are into real estate. The UN has a very unusual decision to make the entire entrance, which is huge, just open to accommodate all the people who come inside and to demonstrate that it welcomes any person coming into the area of the United Nations, and also presenting the flags in the front. But this land, which is in Midtown New York, could have been used for any other purpose. So it's just interesting to see that the Board of Architects, led by Wallace Harrison, they decided to keep this entire area open. We're going into the Security Council chamber, but looking at the time, before we do, Justin, I wanted to ask you if there are any questions, if we should stop for a moment.
We do have a couple. So yeah, we could stop for a moment. And if anybody has any questions up till this point, please put them in the chat. But Jeffrey Bernard had two. The first one was Frank Lloyd Wright ever consulted for an architectural plan? Mm-hmm. And the second is, in the conference building, who did the work on the wall?
All right, in the conference building, so let's go back to that. Are you speaking about this one, I'm assuming? This is a mural by Jose Velazanetti, and he is, he actually, most of his life is spent in Dominican Republic, but he's a Spanish artist. And he called his work Mankind's Struggle for a Better Future. And it shows on the left side images from Second World War, specifically from the Holocaust, people struggling to just survive, and then working in the center under the United Nations emblem, working together to a brighter future, building together with all cultures and all nations a future for the world. Frank Lloyd Wright, as far as I know, was not consulted to be part of the project. I know that he had many ideas in the area. One that I like very much is his idea for Ellis Island. I don't know if you ever encountered that one, but he had some fascinating ideas for the city of New York. As far as I know, he was not consulted to be part of the design of the United Nations headquarters.
Cool. I actually had a question.
Sure.
I was watching. You had said that the building is sort of, because of the UN's work never being complete, the building is never complete. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this or not. Is that intentional, or that's just the way that it is? Is that they will always be working on something because of that initial mission? Or is it just, you know, it's like St. John the Divine, we may never get there, you know?
No, it's completely the opposite from that. It's completely intentional. The idea, let's go back to that just for a moment. This is something that many of the architects agreed that you should not complete the building. It's symbolic, and you can find this also in some traditions that you don't complete the building just to remind you there's always something more that you could do. This was intentional, and there's also a good example of this inside the General Assembly Hall, which we're going to see shortly.
Okay. And Martha just said that she worked at the UN for 39 years, and this tour is great, and she is glad that we are collaborating with you guys. I agree, and I second that, Martha. Thank you very much. I think that's all we have at the moment, so if you want to keep moving, guys, people who are watching, please continue to put questions in the chat. For the end of the presentation, we'll come back and do Q&A. Thank you, Jonathan.
Okay. So we just reached the Security Council. Now the Security Council is it's a special room in the building for many reasons, but the first one is that the architect who designed it, his name is Arnstein Running Arenberg, and he is a Norwegian architect. Now, this entire chamber is a donation from Norway. And back in 1952, the Scandinavian countries, they wanted to spearhead the effort for peace. And actually, they had to win a bid, which is something that I read, obviously, a lot about the architecture of the United Nations. And there's always a question about why were all the rooms that we're going to see now, all the 3 chambers in the chamber, in the conference building, why were they donated by Scandinavian countries? So I found a very interesting piece of information that between 1949 and 1951, there was a bid about who is going to be able to donate the chambers of the United Nations, and the Scandinavian countries won. So I know that many people, there's this rumor that Trygve, the first Secretary General, because he was Scandinavian, then he gave it to his friends. So it's not correct. Actually, the member states voted on Scandinavian countries to donate the chambers, and the first one is the Security Council. Now, Arenberg, he was not part of the board of architects that were chosen to design the United Nations, and he was not even part of the international style movement. He was actually a very traditional architect that he built the city hall in Oslo. He was known for his very conservative design. But interestingly enough, what he did in the Security Council is considered to be one of the most successful rooms in the building. So what he had in mind is the Roman Senate, the beginning of democracy. He wanted the people to really be able to sit around a table in the same way that the first decisions in democracy in the world happened. And if you take a look at this chamber, it's actually built in a very interesting way. On the sides of the room, you have these red chairs, which are for the member states which are not part of the council. Why is this so interesting? Just because the member states that are not part of the council know very well what's happening in the Security Council. If they have any interest in any one of these discussions that have effect on peace and security of the world, they would be probably involved in some way, one way or another, in the decision making. Now, around this table, only 15 members out of the 193 members of the United Nations sit, but the rest of the member states can sit around the table. So, as I was saying before, the delegates of the Security Council will remember they are accountable to the rest of the member states. Also, the front of the image shows these green chairs, which are for the public. And the public can also, at least in the past, view the discussions. Today, these chairs are reserved for either staff members or for press, but still the idea is that they're looking at what the chamber and what the council is doing. On the sides of the room, you can see these windows for either media, for press, photographers, video, and so on. And on the bottom level for the interpreters, which are interpreting the discussions into 7 international languages of the United Nations, Arabic, Spanish, French, English, and Russian, and Chinese. Yeah, so those are the 6 languages. And they're doing this simultaneously, so they need to see what the people are actually saying. So if their body language expresses anything specific, they would know how to translate that or to interpret it as well. That's why they need to look down at the conference room. In the back, you could not see it very well, but this is a mural by Per Krog, another Norwegian artist, who painted the image to inspire the work of the council of Phoenix. You can see it in the center of the image, rising from the ashes of the Second World War into a brighter future. I was speaking about the interpreters. So what you can see here is, I like this image, it's amusing. This is a delegate just listening to the discussion in the General Assembly. through wireless headphones. And this is in 1946. So it's interesting to see that even back then there were wireless headphones. Yeah, it wasn't invented by Apple. And these were not used for very long because they were just too difficult to manage. You had to recharge the batteries. They were very heavy. And also, as you can see here in this fun fact, eventually delegates asked for the earpieces to be only in one ear so they can listen to their advisors sitting in the back of them. So today you can only see one earpiece instead of a full headset. We're moving on to the Trusteeship Council. This is a fascinating council in itself because what it did was tremendously impact decolonization in the world. This is where people from colonies could come and discuss their situation in front of a tribunal, in front of a committee from the member states in the UN, and eventually gain their self-determination. Many of these countries were in Africa back in the time. There were only 4 independent countries back in 1945, but later 1960 or today there are about 54 independent states. So this was very helpful to make colonies independent, but it was designed by Finn Juhl. He was a Danish architect. He loved wood, and he brought 7 kinds of wood to the chamber to make it resemble a Danish forest. Now, here is also something interesting. You can see the hall back when it was originally opened in 1952. On the left side, you can see the open window looking into the East River, a beautiful view, which is usually closed because of the sunlight that just doesn't allow people to speak just without being hit by the sun. So usually the curtains are closed, the windows are closed. But you can see the design here with these elements on the top, colorful elements that are supposed to represent the light coming in through the canopy of the trees in a Danish forest. There were a lot of interpretations about these colors in the future. After this room was built, some people said it's supposed to represent the different flags of the different nations, but actually, from what I studied about the work of Finn Juhl, he wanted this to just resemble a natural forest. And also the lighting, you can see it's indirect. The lights are pointed upwards, so they won't hit you directly. The lights from the top are very soft, and it functions in a similar way to the Security Council, with people being able to sit in the front and looking down at the work of the council. There's a fun fact here too. The Queen of Denmark, she came to inspect the building when it was renovated. This was, if I believe, the beginning of the 2000s, 2010s, 2011, it shows here. She came to inspect the renovation of the Trusteeship Council. And she was worried that the delegates sitting at the tables, their papers would slip off the table because they're so smooth. So she insisted on adding this ledge on the edge of the table, which gained some headlines in Denmark, and it was officially or unofficially actually called the Queen's Lip. We're moving on to the Economic and Social Council. Oh, I just didn't mention, this gentleman over here on the right side of the image, this is Michael Adlerstein, and he was very helpful to me in researching the history of the architecture of the building. He was in charge of the capital master plan of renovating the building. He was also in charge of renovating the Statue of Liberty. He is a professor in Columbia University. He was in charge of renovating the restoration of the Taj Mahal. Very interesting person. And he's escorting Ban Ki-moon here and the Queen into the inspection, of the building. The Economic and Social Council is the third chamber, which was donated by Sweden. And this council was designed by Sven Markelius. He was one of the architects that was on the board of designers for the entire building. And Sven Markelius, his passion was democracy. If I could summarize it from what I understand from his history in one word. And to demonstrate that, let's look at a few elements inside the Economic and Social Council. First of all, the most, I think, obvious element is that there are no colors for the chairs. They're all white chairs. So the chairs in the Economic and Social Council, doesn't matter if you're an official delegate, if you're just coming here to speak about your issue in your community, if you're a specialist, if you're coming from a private company, no matter who sits in the Economic and Social Council, which is in charge of 70% of what the United Nations does regarding development, and you have members here from 54 different member states, they all have the same seat because they're all equal, they all have the same voice, which is interesting. Another interesting part is the seating here. I mentioned before that it was intentional that the seatings were not complete. So Sven Markelius decided to implement this element here too, and only complete the seating above the speakers. He called this part in the center the cloud, and in the back, because you could partly see the seating in the back is black, he called it a starry night. And the idea is that if you're sitting in the audience, looking down at the delegates or the members speaking in this Economic and Social Council, then you are like sitting in the dark and looking at the people who are going to bring you hope. So I don't know what you think about that idea, but I find it just beautiful as an element of design, and the light coming up, coming down from the top spreads equally on all members sitting in the Economic and Social Council. Now, the curtain in the back, because it's important to mention, was designed by Anne Edholm, and she is also a Swedish designer, and it replaced the original curtains that were just unusable after they were treated for fire prevention. They had to be taken down because the treatment just destroyed them. And they were designed by Sven Markelius himself. Actually, this is not something that I could show you here, but his original design appeared in many hotels and just commercial venues all over the United States because they were very popular after they appeared in the United Nations headquarters. So Anne Edholm, she called these curtains dialogues to show that these different elements have to combine with one another if you want to create a whole. As I was saying, the installation of the ceiling was it was incomplete, not only because Sven Markelius wanted to have these elements of light and shade, but also because of a simple technical problem that the ceiling was not high enough. So the first solution was to just keep it bare, but then Sven Markelius decided to add this idea of having a dark area and a lighter area in the front. Here's a very interesting part. I'm not going to talk about it for long, but this is called, this room, it's called the Express Bar. And you could see here that it's kind of abandoned. It hasn't been really in use since probably the late 1980s. But it actually was a bar, and now it's used for special events. And what I want to say about it is that we have to remember that the United Nations, throughout its 75 years of operation, was able to transform politics or diplomacy from what you could see on the left side to what you could see on the right side. In the past, and you could probably notice that I've been mentioning mostly men's names, diplomacy was no different. And these people, these gentlemen in the left side, represent how diplomacy used to look like, with just gentlemen shaking hands, sitting in bars, smoking cigars, and making decisions. But today you have a diverse, you have multicultural, representation from all over the world. You have young people and old people, you have men and women, and you just can see people from really all walks of life coming into the United Nations to make decisions regarding the world. So the Express Bar is a reminder of what politics or diplomacy used to be, but today just no longer exists, at least not in the United Nations headquarters. In the Express Bar, you can see the most expensive piece of art and one of the most beautiful presented in one of the windows. You can see the Kiswa, which is the cover of the Kaaba in Mecca. Every year, a new Kiswa is actually made out of silk and gold. So this Kiswa has 19 kilos of gold in it, in golden threads. And it was taken from the cover of the Kaaba, given as a gift to the United Nations. It is so expensive that no insurance company in the United States agreed to insure it. And we're moving on to the General Assembly Hall. This is a room that was not designed by any specific architect. Actually, it was designed by the office of Wallace Harrison himself. His office, his architect office designed all the interior of the building. And you could see just different elements which are interesting to look at. The General Assembly Hall is a huge, the biggest hall in the building. It has room for anywhere between 1,800 and 2,000 people to be sitting at these tables. What you're looking at here are the delegates' tables. These are these tables with 6 chairs each. Each one is for 2 member states, and each member state sits at the table according to the English alphabet. But every year, the first letter is changed. So this year it could be G, next year it could be I, and the first country would be sitting here, let's say Germany, and then the last country was sitting on the other side following the English alphabet. So every year they change the order so it will show equality and that no one will complain about the seating arrangement. The podium, the most important part of the hall is located in the center, but very different from many other conference halls or assembly halls that you can find. It's actually located on the bottom part of the hall. So anybody sitting in the room is looking down at the podium. And if you're sitting anywhere here and someone is speaking to you, you are looking at them either on their eye level or even above. This is to show that the speakers are accountable to the people sitting in the hall, and also to show that you have to remember who you're speaking to. You're speaking to the world, you're not speaking at the world. People who have been speaking here were leaders and still are, leaders from all over the world, the President of the United States, the delegates from different member states, which are official ambassadors to the United Nations, but also people like you and me. Maybe you remember from last September, Greta Thunberg, the young Swedish woman, 16 years old at the time, who spoke here and accused the leaders of the world for not doing enough about climate change. Or Malala Yousafzai from Pakistan, who spoke about education for young women. These are all examples of just people who came here to talk about what they think is most important for the world. And the delegates sitting here from all over the world are making decisions together. This is the only room with the United Nations emblem in the center. And it shows that even countries that are at war with each other would still sit in the same hall together. Maybe not side by side. There was an interesting comment once on a tour that someone asked me, so who sits between the eyes? And I was not sure what the person is asking, but then they explained, you have the countries that start with the letter I, they don't really like each other. So who sits between the eyes? So that was amusing, but actually no one sits there. So these countries have to get along, even if they are at war with each other, which is just the only place in the world where that can happen. Going back to speaking about the architecture, the United Nations General Assembly was built to contain sound. So the wood behind the speaker and podium is meant to absorb sound. The shape of the chamber itself, of the hall, is also meant to prevent sound from coming in or going out into the hallways. And this works very well. So even if people are talking a lot during the conferences, then you can't hear anything but the speakers for the most part. The back and behind the speakers, you can see the three chairs for the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres at the time, or any other Secretary General sitting over here on the right. In the center, it will be the President of the General Assembly, which is a delegate appointed by the member states for a term of 1 year. That will be the person that manages the sessions of the General Assembly discussions. And on the left side would be for the Deputy Secretary General, which is either a high official or the actual deputy for the General Secretary General. Another interesting part, the chairs on the sides, the blue chairs that you could see on the left and right side of the podium, those were originally built for the spouses of the speakers. So you can bring your husband or wife to sit and observe while the speakers are talking. Today, it's used for special guests. So if you're invited to speak, maybe you'd find yourself sitting over here before you go up and talk. And the dome you could see here on the top, which is also, you could see it from the outside of the building. This was an addition by the United States. The United States actually gave $23 million in a loan to the United Nations so they can complete the building, because they didn't have the funds back in 1949. So they said, we want this to be just the same dome that they have in many other official buildings in the country. But Niemeyer didn't really like that idea. So we said, okay, we're gonna take the dome, but we're gonna make it for lighting. So it's a fixture for lighting inside the General Assembly Hall. And he said that he would not want anybody to ever paint or make any decorative element inside the dome. And that's why you have to keep it in its bare metal form, so it will be impossible to decorate. So that's the addition by the United States. And I want to show you also something which I like very much. Is you can see here the podium with the three chairs, the Secretary General, President, and Vice Secretary General, Deputy. The architects actually wanted 2 General Assembly halls. They wanted one to be built where the existing one is now, but this is actually an image of the architects describing what they thought the General Assembly building would look like. And on the right side, I have a better image of it here. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but what we're looking at on the bottom part, on the right side, is where another General Assembly hall was supposed to be built, different from the one on the left side. But this also explains the room that was left in the 2 floors, the first, the first, second, and actually the 3rd floor in the conference building, entering into the General Assembly building, which was actually supposed to be another hall. So they never built it because they never had the money to do it. And that is where I conclude my tour. Yeah, I'd like to say thank you.
Thank
so,
you.
Justin, any questions or anything at all?
Well, you did get some questions coming in, but Herta came in and answered them. while you were speaking, I always say, I said this last week, the the UN is an efficient team, boy. You
Thank
guys
you,
had a
Harry.
great presentation. We did have a couple of memories being shared by some of our insiders also while you were speaking. Again,
Huh?
there was a question about the accessibility to the public of the UN and the fact that after 9/11, security measures drastically changed. Martha Clark, who had worked there, said she'd worked there in 1963 and it was very open.
Yeah.
Robin had said that as a child in the 60s, and actually Robin told me this story yesterday on the phone. I would go with my parents each year to select our Christmas cards from the UN. It was a big thing to see the selection of the designs each year, as well as to explore the grand lobby and staircase. And you are getting high praise. Great tour. Thank you for the presentation. So does anybody have any questions that have not been answered yet for Jonathan before we take our group photo? And again, here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link into the UN 75 site if you would like to take the survey, if you haven't already. There it is in the chat. If anybody else needs it, I will try to email it out this afternoon, or you can email me at justin@untappedcities.com. Before you go and before we take our picture, or any other questions before I move on to our programming? Jonathan, this was excellent.
Thank you very much.
Did I see, you know what? I meant to ask you the first time, but I'm throwing in another question for me. Did I see Sputnik hanging in the?
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, wait, is that Sputnik? I'm a big space history. I love space history, and I just saw. I was like, wait a minute, I didn't know. That's a model of Sputnik? I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, let's go back to that. Sorry for browsing through the entire presentation.
Right.
Here we go. So, what do you see here on the top? That's the replica of the actual Sputnik, but it's the real size.
Yes, it was so small.
It's very small. Yeah. It's very small. Also, you can see here the pendulum from the Netherlands. If you could barely see it, but this element on the far end is a Foucault pendulum, which proves that the Earth is actually rotating. So if you have any doubts, there's proof right here.
Go check it out. I love it. I love it. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for going back. Again, more praise. And I'm assuming we're good with questions. So I'm going to tell you what our lineup of programming is, and then we will take our screenshot. So next week, we are back on Tuesday. Oh, with me. I will be doing my virtual tour, The Secrets of Coney Island, which is a lot of fun. I have missed Coney Island so much this summer. I've biked down there, but it's very quiet. So we will visit it in its heyday from the 1940s all the way to modern times. So join me on Tuesday at noon. Tuesday evening, we just added this on. The SS Columbia, which is the oldest Kirby steamer left. It's the only Kirby steamer left and built in 1902. I actually am working with them to do a theatrical presentation, which hopefully I will be presenting to you guys in September. They are doing a screening of a short film about Sarah Elizabeth Ray, who was the Rosa Parks of the Columbia 10 years before Rosa Parks. That will be in the evening, and that will be run by them. We are hosting it, but you can sign up through us. And then next Wednesday, we are doing the virtual talk of the Central Park North Woods, which we tried to do a couple weeks ago, had a technical problem, had to reschedule. I was told by Fred, everything's good. So join us next week. We have a nice full week next week. We will be visiting Coney Island. We'll be visiting the Columbia. And all right, let's take our picture. So who is, oh, Emily, you're taking the picture, right? Everybody say hi to Emily from last week. Hi, Emily.
Hi, everyone. Okay.
All right, you tell us when. So everybody turn your cameras on if you want to be in the
Please
picture.
turn on your camera. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Let's do another one. 3, 2, 1. Yeah, we're good.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. A pleasure. This has been great. If you guys have anything else, let us know. I would love to do more. And of course, keep in touch with us at Untapped We'd love to hear from you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Emily. Thank you,
Thank you
Meg.
very much.
Everybody, to everybody who was a part of this. Have a great day, guys. Everybody stay safe, and I will see you next week. Bye.